Okay, so we're carrying on with scene 4 at the bottom of page 44. Um, from this moment where Blanche is attempting to formulate this kind of, I think, false sense of pragmatism in order to extricate herself from this supposedly awful situation that she is in New Orleans. And importantly, she says here, I've got to think of something. Don't laugh at me, Stella. I think her impractical nature, and I think her, I think this shows us her inability to formulate the solution to her predicament because she lacks material power, and this is the problem: is that her material power is being completely destroyed, and that this is made strikingly evident towards the end of this particular scene because. Because she snatches her purse open, 65 cents in coin of the realm. This is a kind of crude display, I think. It shows the lack of material power, which I think is an interesting contrast with Stanley from the Birthday Party, Stanley Weber, because his absence or possession of power is not necessarily to do with that kind of material wealth. I think his ability to live sort of free from interference in the boarding house suggests that he has some form of material wealth, and actually, the source of his power is more sort of metaphysical conviction in his ability to dominate and his inclination to do so, and that's really what it comes down to in the Birthday Party. A little further down, Stella insists, I know how it helps you. She offers Blanche some money and says, I know how it helps your morale just having a little pocket money. And I think this directly shows up that sense of Blanche's actual reliance on material wealth. And I think it directly contrasts with her kind of previous assertion that she doesn't really care about having money. And so that uncertainty and inconsistency, I think, connects to many of the characters in A Birthday Party, that their socially presented selves are unlike their actual sort of either authentic selves or their absence of authentic selves. And Blanche follows this by making an obvious bluff. Oh, no, thank you, I'll take to the streets. And again, it's this sort of hysterical overreaction that encourages, actually, Stella to have sympathy with her. And she says, how did you happen to get so low on funds? And she just has this evasive language that I think masks the truth of the past. Money just goes, it goes places, and those repetitions here, I think that those moments of inarticulacy that connect with Pinter so well. And she rubs her forehead. Sometime today I've got to get hold of a bromo. So she's talking now about alcohol, and you can see that sudden transition from the reminder of her material weakness to that need for alcohol, that need for the evasion of reality. A little lower down, she talks about, she suddenly shifts the topic to Stanley. She says, Stella, I can't live with him. You can, he's your husband. But how could I stay here with him after last night with just those curtains between us? And I think there's a sense of taint, I think, but also a kind of compulsive sexuality about the relationship between them, that, you know, she can't stay there because he's so offensive to her sensibility, but also, I think, because of his sexual magnetism that she is, to a certain extent, driven by. And those curtains, again, become the symbol of that sense of vulnerability that she has towards the forces that are beyond her control that we are seeing in the external features of the set in New Orleans. She's driven to this kind of, to her destiny by her weakness, which I think in some ways contrasts with Stanley to a certain respect. You know, he's driven to his destiny, I think, by other people's inclinations to dominate him, whereas Blanche, I think, is continually presented as this kind of fragile individual. Here at the bottom, there's this sort of social class offensive quality to Blanche and Stella's interaction. She says, I take it for granted that you still have sufficient memory of Belrev to find this place and these poker players impossible to live with. Well, you're taking entirely too much for granted. I can't believe you're in earnest. No. So there's this, again, this sense of social class that mars the interaction between the two characters. And she says, I understand how it happened a little. You saw him in a uniform, an officer, not here. And so this attraction that she understands shows us that she's still wedded to class superiority, because, of course, that he has to be an officer. He couldn't just be someone in the military. But again, I think we see that beginning suggestion of her, the sort of veiled connection to her actual past. There's a veiled suggestion of what's brought her here, the promiscuity with men in the military. She said, I'm not sure it would have made any difference where I saw him. So again, there's this sense of, I think, a sort of a democratic impulse in Stella's behaviour that immediately contrasts with Blanche's sense of, I think, an attachment to social superiority and snobbery. But again, there's this suggestion of forces that are sort of beyond their station in life and beyond their situation in life that are compelling Stella and Stanley together. So there's an important sense of compulsion about their interaction. And the rest of the scene is taken up with this exchange between the two of them discussing Stanley. So she said, now don't say it was one of those mysterious electric things between people. If you do, I'll laugh in your face. I think part of this is idealistic, but it's also dismissive of genuine passion. So there's an important sense here of sort of the sexual magnetism that drives people together. And of course, Blanche, importantly, herself is unaware, and I think she's unaware or dismissing this because of her past. She's dismissive of this because of her past and her previous traumatic experience with precisely that type of sort of almost magnetic passion. She says, all right, then don't. But there are things that happen between a man and a woman in the dark that sort of make everything else seem unimportant. So we here see, I think, this submission to a force of passion that's determined by a force beyond her control. And that submission is ultimately, I think, what allows her to survive in the play. I think importantly, Stanley in the play sees flaws elsewhere, but actually not in him. So we have this sense here that he is able to sort of dominate people because of his sort of animal magnetism, and that's partly what prevents him from seeing his own flaws. Blanche counters this, and what are you talking about is brutal desire, just desire, the name of that rattletrap streetcar that bangs through the quarter up one old narrow street and down another. So she seems to belittle this, and this is this crucial lines that explain the sort of significance of the title. So actually there's a sort of accuracy of vision and an inability to sort of for self-scrutiny here, that she does understand the sort of compulsive, powerful nature of desire, but she's entirely unable to turn that vision on herself. And I think that I think creates a connection with Stanley in the birthday party that is again able to see flaws elsewhere, but is inaccurate with his own self-assessment. He overestimates his power and his he underestimates his weaknesses, certainly. Haven't you ever ridden that streetcar? Stella, they're talking through this extended metaphor here. It brought me here, and there's a sort of an obvious honesty about this. It did literally bring her here, but it also metaphorically, the compulsive power of desire is what brings her to the situation that she finds herself in and brings her to New Orleans. Then don't you think your superior attitude is a bit out of place? She says, I'm not being or feeling at all superior, Stella. Believe me, I'm not. It's just this. This is how I look at it. A man like that is someone to go out with once, twice, 3 times when the devil is in you, but live with, have a child by. And so here, I think she shows us that she is completely determined by that same force, and obviously that's partly what compels her in the plot. But again, shows us that she doesn't almost behave with integrity and trust that sort of powerful magnetic attraction, and that there is, I think, a sense of socioeconomic prejudice that prevents her submitting herself to the force of an attraction like that. And in some ways, there's more integrity in Stella's approach. She says, I have told you I love him, then I tremble for you. Tremble for you. I cannot help your trembling if you insist on trembling. So I think there's an accusation here of her sort of performance and hypocrisy in this lines. This sort of hysterical invocation of sensibility, of the repetition of trembling. But then Stella understands that this is a sort of hysterical approach and says, if you insist on trembling. And there's again this pause that I think acknowledges that there's an element of performativity about Blanche's response. And then Blanche says, may I speak plainly? And I think there's a sort of irony in this, because she is actually unable to speak plainly. You know, her plain speak, as we'll see as we get to this longer sort of extended monologue that she performs in the next page, shows us that she actually cannot really talk about this without using figurative language and metaphor. But she's also unable to speak plainly, and as yet somehow managed to be offensive at the same time. So there's a sort of combination here of her prejudice and her snobbery, but also her elusive conversation. So outside the train approaches, and again, that's supposed to be a reminder of the power of desire, you know, the streetcar named Desire. They're silent till the noise subsides, and they're both in the bedroom. Under cover of the train's noise, Stanley enters from outside. So these external forces, I think, are indistinguishable from desire itself. And so there's a conflation there between the power of these external forces and Stanley, and of the compulsive nature of desire, all together, you know, within this piece of stagecraft. He stands unseen by the women, holding some packages in his arms, and overhears their following conversation. He wears an undershirt and grease-stained seersucker pants. There's a physical reminder of the snobbery that Blanche is about to unleash into the dialogue here. And so we've got this huge sense of his compulsive power through the stagecraft right at the moment where Blanche is going to unleash all of her prejudice and hostility towards him into the play itself directly, or as directly as she can manage. So it's her first comment, well, if you forgive me, he's common. And that's her first point of criticism. It's not about his violence and his supposed immorality or his crude materialism. It is to do with his socioeconomic class. And then she says, bringing up, Stella, that you suppose that any part of a gentleman's in his nature, not one particle no. If he was just ordinary, just plain, but good and wholesome, but no. There's something downright bestial about him. And so she animalizes him and turns him into this kind of primitivistic force, which of course has an element of truth in it, you know. But I think the mistake in this play is that all these other characters underestimate their own bestiality. You know, we see the characterization of the play is to create this huge sense of society as this kind of Darwinistic survival contest, and that Stanley wins because he is the one that has honestly embraced that feature of his being, and that Blanche is the one who is furthest away from honestly engaging with that compulsive, impulsive, and powerful part of her nature. And then Stella coldly says, go on and say it all, Blanche. And I think this is partly where the loyalty begins to shift. And, you know, after the violent scene of scene 3, you know, I think Stella's loyalty is more at this moment in time towards Blanche, at least on an intellectual level, on a level that she uses her rationality for. And so there's a real, this is a real sort of mistake from Blanche's perspective. And she repeats it. He eats like an animal, has an animal's habits. Eats like one, moves like one, talks like one. So she's almost using his sort of powerful rhetoric of tricolon, you know, that rule of 3, to animalize him. There's even something subhuman, something not quite to the stage of humanity yet. Yes, something ape-like about him, like one of those pictures I've seen in anthropological studies. So this sort of anaphora that she uses to describe him, I think, there's an element of kind of fascism in this, I think. There's an element of bizarre genetic science that supposedly is used to portray the lower classes and various races, you know, and there's an enormous sense of almost socioeconomic prejudice in this critique of him. thousands and thousands of years have passed him right by. So this sort of hyperbole, you look at all this, and this is rhetoric that she's using. And there he is, Stanley Cavazzi, survivor of the Stone Age, as if he is this kind of primitive human being, bearing the raw meat home from the kill in the jungle. And again, she bestializes him. And you here waiting for him, criticizing Stella for engaging in this kind of primitive connection with him. Maybe he'll strike you, or maybe grunt and kiss you, that is, if kisses have been discovered yet. So there's this sense of, I think, sarcasm, again, in those lines that shows us her huge hostility. Night falls and other apes gather there in the front of the cave, all grunting like him and swilling and gnawing and hulking. His poker night, you call it, this party of apes. Somebody growls, some creature snatches at something, the fight is on. God, maybe we are a long way from being made in God's image, but Stella, my sister, there has been some progress since then. So, importantly, what we see here is this description of the poker game and its vitality, but she kind of loves power. She can't face this sense of reality, So she turns herself towards individuals like Shep because she ultimately values material power, but here is unable to face the kind of the brute reality of physical power. And then a little further down, she says, such things as art and poetry and music, such kinds of new light have come into the world. And I think it's important in those lines that she conflates aesthetic content, art and poetry and music, with light itself. You think of her aestheticization of the light by putting the paper lantern over it, that symbol. And that there shows us the way that she blends these two things together. They've come into the world. In some kinds of people, some tenderer feelings have had some little beginning. So there's this sense of, invoking sensibility and authentic emotion that I think is constantly being undermined by her because she is herself so inauthentic and performative. I've had some little beginning. That we've got to make grow and cling to and hold as our flag. So there's a sort of moralistic cause, a sense of crusader commitment about this particular speech. This is almost like a piece of political rhetoric. And she warns us about the dark march towards whatever it is we're approaching. Don't hang back with the brutes. So she frames him in this as an enemy, and portrays him as animalistic, and seems to be anticipating some kind of kill. That this represents this sort of Darwinian competition that society is being depicted as by Williams in this moment in time. And then he continues this with the stagecraft. Another train passes outside. Stanley hesitates, licking his lips. And again, that's where there is this sense of him being predatory, anticipating his kill and threatening her in some way with a sense of menace. Then suddenly he turns stealthily about, and that's, I think, his animalistic movements show this. It shows the sort of predatory intent, and withdraws through the front door. The women are still unaware of his presence. When the train has passed, he calls through the closed front door. So there's a huge irony here, because he's being criticised for a lack of subtlety, and he's the one that here is moving in a kind of subtle predatory fashion. And so there's a huge sense of irony here from Blanche's perspective, because she is ultimately attacked because of her sort of intimation of class superiority, whereas I think Stanley in the birthday party is simply attacked because his existence as a sort of critic of social orthodoxy on its own functions as an existential threat to people like Goldberg and McCann. Stella's gone to the front door. Stanley enters casually with his packages. Hi, Stella. Blanche back? Yeah, she's back. Hi, Blanche, and he grins at her. So she has defined relationships in terms of this kind of animal conflict, and he knows that he can win in this case, and that's where his satisfaction comes. When she has defined him in that way, then he is going to fulfill that type of behavioural expectation, and he knows if that is the way that she's envisioning interaction, then he knows he's going to come out on the winning side of this. Them darn mechanics at Fritz's don't know their can from third base. Stella had embraced him with both arms fiercely, so there's this huge demonstration of loyalty in this conflict, and in the view of Blanche. So there's a sense of deliberate commitment through this action to his way of seeing the world and to his animalistic magnetism. He laughs and clasps her head to him. Over her head, he grins through the curtains at Blanche. So here there's this huge sense of awareness on his part that he has her as an ally. There is awareness, I think, of their alliance. And I think, again, this shows us a connection between Goldberg and Lully. There's a sort of confidence of victory through power in sexuality that I think invites comparison with the way that they come together in the play. As the lights fade away with a lingering brightness on their embrace, the music of the blue piano and trumpet and drums is heard. So this is the kind of gradual, again, the sounds of reality penetrating the action of the play.